Okay, so my symbol for and, the conjunction, was going to look like this. So remember what we associated with and with the intersection and set theory. I think you see why it has a very similar symbol. And or we connected that with union, the disjunction, and it looks like a V. So the if then is an arrow, the conditional from left to right, and biconditional, the if and only if, is a double arrow. A negation, we know that technically that is not a connective, but we work with that symbol very often. Typically, simple statements are denoted with lowercase letters like P, Q, R, etc. If we use P to represent this simple statement, Holger is a dog, and we use Q to represent the simple statement, Spike is a cat, then P and Q represents the statement, Holger is a dog and Spike is a cat. So remember, this symbol is a conjunction. So the statement, if Holger is a dog, then Spike is not a cat, would be written symbolically as this. All right, let's move this up. Let P represent the statement, I study for the exam, and let Q represent the statement, I passed the exam. Write each statement below in words. So remember, this symbol stands for if and only if, okay? And so if, I should say, I passed the exam, if and only if I study for the exam. Okay, now on B we have a negation of P. So I do not study for the exam. And that symbol right there is our conjunction, so that would be and. I passed the exam. All right, let's see what we have for C. Over here on B, I really didn't need the do. Yeah, I guess I do need the I do not. So on C, I can say I study for the exam. And remember, this is our disjunction, which means or I do not pass the exam. All right, on D, if I do not study for the exam, then I do not pass the exam. All right, let's look at example 7. This will go a little bit faster because we are going to use symbols. Let P represent the statement, Tim is an engineer, and let Q represent the statement, Tim has a computer. So write each statement in symbols. So Tim isn't an engineer. So that statement was P, and we're negating it. So there's our symbol for negation. Tim is an engineer, so that was P. And, well, we need our conjunction symbol. He doesn't have a computer. So having a computer is Q, and doesn't have, that's a negation of Q. If Tim is an engineer, then he has a computer. So that is a conditional. So we're going to have P implies Q. Okay, let's look at D. We have Tim isn't an engineer if and only if he doesn't have a computer. Well, that is biconditional, so that's going to get a double arrow. So Tim isn't an engineer. Him being an engineer is P. We have a negation of that. He doesn't have a computer having a computer is Q, and we want the negation of that. All right, so on E, it says Tim has a computer or he's an engineer. All right, so or is a disjunction. So Tim has a computer is P. No, that's Q. Sorry. And he's an engineer. That was the P. All right, so let's look at example 8. Let P represent the statement Brian bought a computer, and let Q represent the statement Brian bought a smartphone. Write any statements and words using symbols, and write the statement and symbols using words. Okay, so we have a conjunction here. So what was P? That was Brian bought a computer. So Brian bought a computer, and he bought a smartphone. Okay, Brian didn't buy a computer, or he bought a smartphone. So B was buying a computer, so he didn't do that. Or is going to be our disjunction, and then it says he bought a smartphone, so that's going to be Q. All right, so we have a negation of Q first. So if, and it's conditional, if Brian didn't buy, the Q was the smartphone, a smartphone, oops, goodness, then he didn't buy a computer. All right, now let's see what's next. Brian bought a computer if and only if he didn't buy a smartphone. So Brian buying a computer was P, and if and only if is biconditional. He didn't buy a smartphone. So that'll be the negation of Q. All right, so on E we have a conditional. If Brian bought a computer, then, okay, let's see what we have. We've got a double negative here. So we're saying that Brian didn't buy a smartphone, but that he didn't buy a smartphone. So that means then he bought a smartphone. Okay. Brian didn't buy a computer or a smartphone. Okay. So he didn't buy a computer or a smartphone. So or is a disjunction and smartphone is Q. Okay. Okay, so on the next couple of examples, it says write the negations of the following statements using De Morgan's law. Okay, so that particular law said if we had a negation of a conjunction, that was an equivalent statement to negation of the first item, first statement, and a disjunction with the negation of the second one. So I think you could probably figure out that if we had a disjunction negation, that's going to be equivalent to a conjunction of the negation of the two statements. Okay? So they're asking us to write negations of the following statements using De Morgan's law. And I'm just going to keep this in symbols right now. Let's just make life a little bit easier here. Okay, so on this one, I am negating the negation of P or Q, and not P. So using De Morgan's law, we're going to look at this one right here. So I need the negation of this first item. So negation of a negation would be P. And instead of the or, it's now going to be and then the negation of what's in this parentheses. All right, so, oops. There we go. All right, so now I need the negation of this particular parentheses using De Morgan's law. So now we're going to use this property right here, okay? So I have P disjunction, and then I'm going to have the negation of Q. And instead of the conjunction, I'm going to have a disjunction. And then the negation of that P would be, the negation of the negation of P would be P. There. All right, there we go. Okay, so let's try this next one. I need the negation of this particular compound statement. So I need the negation of this particular parentheses. And it's no longer going to be a conjunction. It'll be now a disjunction and then the negation of the R. So let's now use De Morgan's theorem and use our negation of this particular statement. So a negation of P. It's going to be P, and instead of the and, it'll be the or, and then the negation of Q, and then or the negation of R.